Is everybody here that's going to be here? Are there still people in the social hall, Melissa? Okay. Well, put her under the bus. Throw her under the bus. Okay. We want to welcome you to our Lunch and Learn. In case you wondered, this is the learn part. Hope you enjoyed lunch that Tammy, our amazing office person, arranged with the help of Rabbi Nico. We are about to enjoy a wonderful presentation about the female rabbinate in Israel, the Cholon case, featuring Rabbi GalitCohen-Kedem, who is the founder and rabbi of Congregation Kodesh V'Chol, which means holy and ordinary. I love that name. We usually only hear about Kodesh L'Chol, so Kodesh V'Chol in Cholon, Israel. And I told her, I think I have relatives in Cholon. You know, it's like, oh, you know somebody Jewish in Cholon? No. For the past 12 years, this congregation has grown from 5 individuals in a living room to a community of more than 150 families. Rabbi Galit holds a Bachelor of Arts in Hebrew Literature and Hebrew Language from the Hebrew University and a Master of Arts in Gender Studies from Bar Ilan University. She was ordained in 2014 at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. Galit is married to Dr. Adar Cohen, even though he was born in Cheshvan. Yes. He was born in Cheshvan, but his name is Adar.
I got it.
Right.
Wrong month.
He covers 2 months of the year. He is chair of the Teacher Education Department at the Seymour Fox School of Education at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Together they have 3 children, Hodaya, Uri, and Ivri. Rabbi Galit currently serves as a visiting rabbi educator at Congregation B'nai Israel in Sacramento, which is in California, in case you were wondering. And I would like to invite her now to share some thoughts with us, either behind the podium if you want, or in front. You can walk around. We're informal.
Well, it depends if I ate nicely and I don't have any stains, because Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. I'm always happy to speak to a bunch of Jews after they've eaten. I feel more safe, but it is more of a challenge because you know what happens after you have a nice lunch on Shabbat. So I got to be kind of interesting here. I'm gonna pull all the tricks I figured out in the last years of the rabbinate. So nice to be here, and thank you, Rabbi Nico and Noga, for having us, and thank you, Tommy, who's been just so gracious and helpful. Where are you? Can't see. Well, she's probably organizing something. And just it's as I said, and I really mean it. It's such a privilege to pray with you. You have such a wonderful spirit here. It's so familial, and it's so authentic. And it's happy. The music's wonderful, and I'm just really, really happy to be here with you. So we called this talk after a real quote. The quote was, my daughter, when she was in kindergarten, yeah, it's a real story, she was about 4, her afternoon school teacher was, talking to the kids and asking them, she was curious about the kids. She said, so what does your mother do? What does your father do, right? And Hodaya said, Ima sheli Rabbah. Rabbah, in Hebrew, is a new word. It's a word that's only been used probably in the last 20 years. Not everyone really knows it. Usually people know the word Rabbanit. Rabbanit is what Adar is, right? It's just with a female suffix. Okay, so it's a wife of a rabbi. But a female rabbi, in Hebrew, every word has gender, which is kind of difficult to do the they thing in Hebrew, but that's a whole other discussion. So you're either a Rav, which is a male rabbi, a real rabbi, you know what I mean? The real stuff, the serious stuff, or you're a Rabbanit. You're married to a male rabbi. So when Hodaya said to her teacher, I'll never forget this, she said, Ima sheli Rabbah. And she literally said, "Your mother is a what?" So we named this talk today after that last famous words, right? Your mother is a what? And that's now 15. So it's been over a decade of working in Cholon. And I have to say that if I would be now with a group of people from the Cholon area, or the Tel Aviv area for that matter, or even more into the periphery, okay? If I would be standing in a group of people about this size about 10 years ago, and I would say, "Hello, hi, I'm a rabbah, I'm a female rabbi. Don't get me wrong, I'm not married to a rabbi. He's not a rabbi, I would say, but I am a rabbi myself. How many of you have ever met a female rabbi?" And as this is a new English word I've learned since I've been in Sacramento. If this were 10 years ago, there would be crickets. I love it. Crickets. I didn't know what that was at the beginning. I would ask people, did you hear anything back from the crickets? It's crickets. Where are the crickets? So it took me a moment to understand where that's coming from, but I love it. 10 years later, 12 years later, and I've checked this. Like, I've been very consistent about this. I've been saying, so I'm a Reform rabbi, ani rabbah. How many of you have met or seen or heard of a female Reform rabbi? And now I get probably between a third and half of the room raise their hands. And then I ask them, where did you meet one? So some say, oh, I went to a bar mitzvah. Of course I know. I'm like, where? Oh, Ranana, sure. Was it Tommy Kolberg? Of course you know that. Oh, I went to Gezel. Oh, of course. Do you know? Okay. Jewish geography. Some of them said, oh, we went to a wedding, or the cousin of my niece's neighbor's best friend went to the army with someone who later on Facebook is apparently ordained to be a rabbi, right? That's Israel for you. And a third of them are actually like, so you're the one who goes every month to the Kotel and makes those ultra-Orthodox men really angry. And I'm like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. But of course, the minute you are a female praying with a talit in Israel, you could be conservative, you can be Orthodox, you can be non-affiliated, Reformi. Okay? You were affiliated as a Reform Jew. So that changed. And I'll tell you a little anecdote that was just, there was a nice piece about it in the Israel Post, I think, about a couple of weeks ago. A colleague of mine, an older colleague, Rabbi Nava Chefetz, who stands for the Education Department of Rabbis for Human Rights. And they're a political organization. Not sure most of my congregants would agree with what they do. But they do humanitarian work as much as they can to go to the West Bank and to the territories and try to, I would say, turn around the relationship between Jews and Arabs in the occupied territories. And it was Tu B'Shvat, so it wasn't so long ago. And on Tu B'Shvat, a bunch of rabbis, Reform rabbis, but not only, went with this organization to plant trees that were uprooted, supposedly, by the settlers in that area. We went over, we read this together, didn't we? Remember when we did a Zoom? I think we read this together. Anyway, so she tells Rabbi Naama Kelman from the Hebrew Union College of Jerusalem, she says that they were entering a certain area that usually civilians are not allowed from Israel to enter. And a bunch of reserve duty soldiers stopped them and said, "It's me. This is not an area that civilians can enter. Okay, this is a military zone." And Nava, who was wearing a kippah, said, well, we're actually here on a humanitarian, political, I would say, initiative, and we're peaceful. We're just here to plant olive trees that were uprooted by the settlers about a month ago. And these two very impressive reserve soldiers were looking at them. They said, well, you know, it's a problem because civilians are not allowed in here. And another rabbi, female rabbi, came up and she was saying, but you know, this is important for us. This is our religious practice. This is how we want to practice Tu B'Shvat. So we would appreciate it if you would let us in because this is really important to us. And then he noticed that Nava was wearing a kippah. So he said to her, is that a kippah? And she said, yes. I said, are you a Reform rabbi? At Rabbah Reformit? And she said, yes. Do you feel the suspense? I mean, do you understand the situation here? We're in the occupied territories. There are these two really big, very man-like soldiers. Reform rabbis coming to plant olive trees and Tu B'Shvat in the territories. I mean, what? This is not, you know. He says, I had a Reform bar mitzvah with a female rabbi. Do you know Rabbi Tammy Karlberg from Ranana? She said, of course. I went to school with her. How's she doing? Oh, you grew so much. I'll say hi. This is great. And the guy looks at him and he says, my son had a Reform bar mitzvah with a Reform rabbi. Right? And so he says, you know this from Modin? Of course, Kinneret. He's like, do you know all the female rabbis in Israel? She says, well, there are only 62 of us, which is true. He said, oh, well, go, pass. It's okay. We got your back. I love this story. I love this story because it's like, sometimes people tell me, is it ever going to change? Because Israel is a conservative culture. Is it ever going to change? My theory is that the problem isn't necessarily with Reform Judaism, though it is sometimes not an easy aesthetic for many Orthodox or conservative with a small c, right? Not conservative movement, but conservative as in conservative beliefs and ideas. It's not easy for them to see a female presence next to the female with the Torah. It's just not an aesthetic they grew up with. It's very far away from how they were raised. And they were even taught that it's wrong, okay? So I don't think it's necessarily a religious issue as much as it is equal rights for women issue. Sometimes I just feel it's a sexist issue, honestly. I sometimes I joke that being Orthodox is a trait of character, not a denomination. And my feeling is that many times, a lot of my counterparts in Orthodoxy actually understand why women should be part, and they share this view. So it's not an Orthodoxy versus Reform issue. This is more of, do we embrace change versus we want Judaism the way our parents or grandparents or grandparents had it, and that is the right way. So it's really more complex. It's more confusing. So when I grew up, I didn't have a rabbi in my life, let alone a female rabbi, and I've never met a female rabbi. And I want you to think about the first time you met a female taxi driver, surgeon, astronaut, vice president. Not comparing myself, just saying. Think about the first time you've met a female, something that in your mind you always thought of it as a male job or position. And think of the surprise, right? That moment that you told the nurse, thank you, nurse, and she's like, I'm the doctor. Right? Do you know that moment? Yeah. The time that I walk into a class and I sit down and I start teaching, and this lovely older woman says to me, you're so sweet, but when is the rabbi coming? Sorry. She's here, So how do you have that conversation? How do you begin that conversation in which just by standing there, you're confusing people? Just by your existence, it's no matter what you do. I was visiting a Reform congregation in Toronto, and I was asked to put a kippah on, which I don't, usually. I don't put a kippah on. So the rabbi, they said to me, you really should put a kippah on. And I said, really, why? He said, well, we're reclaiming Judaism. It's about equality. I'm teaching the kids here they should wear a kippah. I said, first of all, I'll wear a kippah. I'll respect what you do. I took a picture of myself. I sent the board. Everyone thought they couldn't stop laughing. Like, she's wearing a kippah. It's so unusual. But then I asked her, I said, tell me, please, what is your dress code on the Bema? Do you have a dress code on the Bema here at TB? Yeah? Table Beth Tikvah? Nothing written. Would you wear anything? I think we probably think about what we're going to wear, right? I don't know about you, Rabbi Daniel. It's easier for you guys. I'm sorry, but it is a gender thing. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. And this one's better, by the way. seriously, I mean, think about it for a moment, right? So I said to this rabbi, I said, please tell me, share. What's the dress code on the Bema? So she says, okay. She says, she thought about it. She said, one should wear on the Bema, one should refrain from wearing on the Bema anything that will take the attention from what you're saying to what you're wearing. Let's think about it for a moment. You should wear something that will help people focus on what you notice? Do you like it? No, kidding. Notice on what you're saying versus what you're wearing, okay? And I said, that's perfect. That's exactly where I don't wear a kippah. Because if I were to wear a kippah in Israel, I could say deodorant 75 times during the service. No one would notice because their mouths would still be like stuck on what I'm wearing versus what I'm saying. The aesthetics play a huge role in culture change, in social change. So the story I wanted to share with you today is this crazy idea to live in a startup nation, but to decide that you're starting up something that makes way less money than a high-tech company. To start a social organization that will try to change the status quo between religion and state in Israel, and to do it with love, and to do it with humor, and to do it with celebration. I don't demonstrate at the Kotel, support of the wall a lot, but I'm not there, and I don't have my congregation go there with a bus. But how do you change Israel ground up? How do you change the Israeli culture and make it closer, I think, closer to what I think Zionism is all about, which is a true, authentic, free, democratic expression of Jewish creativity and Jewish civilization. How do you do that? How do you start something? Where do you start it? So Ada and I lived in Jerusalem. Both our older kids were born in Jerusalem. But guess what? Jerusalem has quite a few Reform and conservative congregations. They don't need us. So we decided to go back to where we grew up. Adal grew up in Tel Aviv. And to see if all the things we've learned in that beautiful milieu of people, that beautiful bubble of social changers and educators and political activists that we were so fortunate to go to school with in university, if we could go back to our hometowns and change something. It's always a little dangerous. You know that feeling after you've been away from home for a little bit, coming back and you've changed, but like in a second you go back to being 16, because like that's what they expect you to be, you know? So that's sort of the feeling. So when we moved to Cholon, the head of the Reform movement then, who's now first member of Knesset, who was a Reform rabbi, Rabbi GalitCohen-Kedem, who's my rabbi and my mentor, and I can't even tell you what it means to have a first Reform rabbi in the Israeli Knesset, and he's doing important legislators' work, and he's really affecting, I think, the future of Israel and the presence of Israel. And Rabbi GalitCohen-Kedem heard that we're moving to Cholon, and he took me into his office and he said, "You're moving to Cholon, start a congregation." Cholon is a strategic point for the Reform movement. Now, I don't think anyone has ever heard the name of the city of Cholon with anything strategic, right? Let's face it, okay? It's like Sacramento County. They're not saying very nice things about Orange County, just saying. When I'm there, I joke about Orange County. I just want to be like on the safe side. But, it's like it's quintessential Israel. You basically have it all there. You have the ultra-Orthodox Mizrahi, Sephardic, you have the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi, you have more traditional North African Jews, you have many new immigrants from Ethiopia, which, by the way, I have not managed to bring even one yet to my congregation. That is a big challenge I have. There's a big group of post-Ukraine or Russian Jews, and there are a lot of people who grew up in socialist Israel. Cholon used to be a very red city in Israeli terms, like socialists, maybe even communists to a point. And that mixture in Cholon, it kind of puts Cholon on the map like Frank Sinatra sang on New York. If we can make it there, we can make it anywhere, right? if you can infiltrate into the heart of the country, Cholon is pretty much the heart in terms of geographically, and you can be accepted by working class Israelis. No one speaks English. Like a native language. Everyone speaks English, but not a native language. They didn't grow up in a reform or a conservative congregation. Most of them didn't grow up in a community. Some of them, I would say like 10% are I'd call them the community PTSDs. They left a kibbutz, they left an Orthodox, right? They have a community sense, but they're like really like, they have a weird relationship with communal life that tends to be a little bit too like invasive, okay? I always joke, I was like, we are not taking your wages to the greater good. You can relax. So basically, it was a challenge. It was a challenge to start this organization, to start a community, and to dream it big. And I have to tell you, one of the best pep talks I ever got was from an old, very prominent, very successful male white rabbi in Israel who explained to me why it's never going to work. It's a great pep talk. I still thank him for that. And when I walked out, I said to myself, but why not? Like, if we can only speak to upper-class liberal Israelis, then something's wrong with our Torah. Right? We talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about how Torah has so many faces, has so much what to offer us in our lives. Well, in a way, it's saying, let's put this to a test. So, how many people here in this room have ever started something, a business or an organization? Love it. So many female entrepreneurs and others. Okay, where do you start? He's showing his wife. That's very sweet. That's very sweet. But we don't like to look at you as a project or an entrepreneur. We just call that marriage. Okay, so I could joke because we sort of talked yesterday, right? I'm not being too, okay, good. It's all good. Okay, so it's Israeli humor. What can you do? Throw me a word here. What's the first thing you do when you want to start a new business or project or just something innovative? An idea. So thank God the idea was there, right? Judith Kaplan, 100 years ago today, was bat mitzvah. I try to think, like, how'd she feel? Did she wear the talit like her brothers did? When she took the Torah out, did you ever notice this? She took the Torah out. Did she hold it like a weapon, like men do? Often. Or did she hold it like a baby, like women do often? It's really interesting in Israel. When I take the Torah out of the ark, I think it's different here because, again, we've been acclimated. But in Israel, when I ask women to take the Torah out of the ark, they hold it like a baby, horizontal. But if I ask an older man to hold it, you can see he's done, right? You can really see it's in his blood. So what did she feel? Did she feel that she was imitating a boy? Or did she feel that she was doing her own thing? So the idea was there. I didn't make up anything. Honestly, the big success of Kodesh V'chol and Cholon is that we didn't make anything up. We just took the bigger ideas and we checked which ideas or initiatives or practices, best practices that were done in other places, would work for this specific group of people. Okay, it's basic community organizing. It's knowing to ask the questions and see what people need. And what we found is that people in Cholon need three things. I mean, aside from good Wi-Fi and, a good coffee shop, but basics, okay? Above the basics, there are three things they need. Three things that the Israeli society, urban Israeli society, is lacking. One is access to innovative, community-based, free public education. Their feeling was, many families felt, that when they send their kids to the public system, they are disenfranchised. They are just like, trust us, we know what we're doing, you stay out the door, okay? Or even that the default is Orthodox. If you go to kindergarten in Israel, many kindergartens, 10 years ago, it's changing. Friday, there's Kabbalat Shabbat service, right? There's no separation between synagogue and state. So on Friday, there will be a Kabbalat Shabbat service in kindergarten. And the Kabbalat Shabbat service in kindergarten, most kindergartens, the cute little boy will stand with a kippah and hold the cup of the kiddush. And the cute little girl with a white dress will stand with a challah and not say the kiddush. That's how it is. And she'll probably even have a little shmate on her head. And I'm like, does anyone even do that anymore? I mean, okay. So the question is, how does the public system, how can it reflect on what we as a family believe in? And that was something that was lacking. Many parents felt off-put by the public educational system, from kindergarten and up. So the first thing really we did, or the second, was to start a kindergarten. And now we have over 200 students, our educational track that starts at the age of 3, and kids graduate at the age of 12, and we have a track within a school, and we have 3 kindergartens. So that's been going really well, with all the problems of what it means to be a female Reform rabbi walking into a public school giving a class. I'll spare you that, but you can already use your imagination. So education was definitely something we felt that was a need. Value-based education. Education that has a conversation with the parents. It's not an easy conversation because parents today are super anxious. Helicopter, paparazzi, whatever you want to call them. I think I made up paparazzi parents. I kind of like that. So that's definitely, that was definitely a need. Another need, if you visited Cholon, you'll see many high-rises, right? We joke, we live in Davis now. There are less people in our street, the entire street, and we're in 805, than in our building in Cholon. Okay, it's very condensed. Israel is it's small, it's crowded, especially in the Tel Aviv metropolitan. Everyone lives in high-rise buildings, lots of neighbors. You don't know them anymore. You don't know all your neighbors. If you live in 11 stories or 8 stories, 4 apartments every floor, you don't know everyone. And that alienation from your immediate neighbors is something that when you are a young family, or just when you're going through whatever, can be a difficult feeling because you grew up in Israel where you still have this dream that the doors are unlocked, that if you need a little bit of sugar for your coffee and you ran out, you can knock on your neighbor's door. But those are the stories we grew up on. I don't know why it's always the story about the sugar. Why is it always sugar that runs out? Milk? Sugar is never a problem, it's just milk. So if you run out of milk for your coffee, you can knock on someone's door, right? The whole idea of us living in a very tight-knit community, that no longer exists in big cities, okay? And some of these families needed it. So we needed to provide that kind of network. And the third need that I found, and people didn't really ask for it, this is my interpretation of what I heard, is the feeling of agency. It's the feeling that you can still do something to influence the lives you and your children and your grandchildren will have in this country. Okay? This feeling that you can still take part in shaping Israeli society. Now, we're only less 9 million now? Right? Just a little. So we're still in this idea that everyone can really change the world and everyone can really make an impact. But really in everyday life, especially in working class communities, you feel that people are disenfranchised. They don't feel that they have agency to change anything. I remember this woman said to me, "So how did you start a kindergarten? Is that even legal? Right? Is that okay? Can you just start a kindergarten? How do you even, right?" It didn't work with how she thought things worked. Right? Someone important needs to make that decision, not just a parent, right? Or definitely not a female rabbi, who we don't know what that is. So those needs came up in such a strong way. And if you think about it, that's what Judaism is all about. We know how to do education. We know how to do community. And we definitely have tools, ancient tools, to change ourselves and change the world. So really, my role was to interpret. My role was to make it accessible, to translate between languages, and to make it happen. So an idea we had. What else? What else do you need to start a business, to start an idea, to make it happen? Money. Sorry, we have to skip that one because we're doing really bad on that. What? The drive. Okay, the want. I think I answered that, right? I grew up without that. I wanted my kids to have something I didn't. Listen, I grew up in a very secular, when I say secular, do you know what that means in Israel? It means keep kosher, holidays, and no part of Torah, right? I'm exaggerating, but secular basically means non-affiliated, and you don't attend shul, and probably won't keep kosher, but you know the laws of kashrut. You're not completely disengaged with Judaism. It's more of a cultural, sociological, not religious kind of identity, okay? So I was born in New York. I don't know if you know it, it's another English-speaking country here, not on the continent. So I was born there when I was 6. Once I moved to California, I understood how much it's a different English-speaking country. It took me a while. My dad's Israeli, 5 generations, Sephardic, Ladino speaking. I loved how you did the Ladino song of En Keloenu at the end. I was like, I'm home. So he comes from that tradition. Big family, grew up in southern Tel Aviv. My grandmother did not know how to read or write. She went through World War I in Israel and Palestine. And my father grew up, was the last of 5 siblings. He's 87 now. And he was a child during the War of Independence. And he comes from that narrative, from that story. My mother, very different. 13 years apart. My father says it keeps him young. He's right. She was an only child of Holocaust survivors. So she was born after the war in Austria in 1947, and they came to Washington with a sponsor as displaced persons. Very different stories, very different cultures. I once asked my mom, seriously, how did you even talk to each other? And she said, I just love the way he smells. Just like, that is too much information for me, Mom. Thank you. The first time he made her an Israeli salad, she asked him why he's chopping up the garnish because he ate everything with parsley. He's a good Sephardic Jew. And when we grew up in America, before we moved to Israel, I remember us going to shul like a couple of times a year. It was a conservative shul. I remember my grandfather telling me that his family was very Orthodox, probably ultra-Orthodox in his eyes. But my grandmother, Zichra Livracha, she was a heavy smoker. She had a strong, German accent. She was from Lithuania, but it turned very Eastern European accent. And she was making Vienna schnitzel. I won't forget it. She was really thin pieces of veal in the egg, the breadcrumbs, and of course, in butter. What, are you kidding me? She's a Lithuanian Jew. She does it the right way. So she was doing it in butter, and I asked her, and I said, ironically, my brother, who today has nothing to do with his Jewish identity, but he went to Shechter, he went to yeshiva. So he says to her, Grandma, I just learned you're not supposed to, veal in butter. And she said, she's like a little drag, and she says, kosher is what comes out of your mouth, not what goes into your mouth. I love that. It's the best definition of kosher I've ever heard. And it was a very good schnitzel. So basically what I'm saying here, I grew up with this idea. I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't have any role models of how to do Jewish. Right? Just being Jewish is one thing. How do you do Jewish? What does that mean? And this is a relevant question for us too. When you go to the supermarket, how do you do Jewish? When you drive, how do you do Jewish? When you decide if you're buying in Starbucks or in the local coffee shop, how do you do Jewish? Because it can't be just if you like candles on Shabbat or not, if you drive on Shabbat or not, if you buy kosher meat or not. It can't just, that narrows the whole civilization down. It's if you're wearing skirts or that's just so superficial. There must be more to it. What does it mean to do Jewish, to choose, to filter your life through Jewish values? I'm very curious about that. I'm still examining that in my personal life and my personal spiritual growth in our family life. My 2 kids have very different interpretations of what it means to do Jewish, obviously, at their age. And also Adar and I have different interpretations of what it means to do Jewish. He's much more religious than me, by the way. But in many ways, sort of, but in many ways, I think the questions that are always relevant, and those are the questions that I wanted to bring to this new initiative, this new congregation, are questions of identity and meaning. Infusing meaning into everyday life is a very difficult task, especially when the cost of life in Israel is so high and life is extremely hectic. You guys here, really? I mean, I'm generalizing here, but just everything's so much more relaxed. So much more relaxed. And just people have hobbies, which is crazy. And you do stuff. Like, that's not just like work and kids and figuring out. I know life is hectic always, but there is something about living in constant notion of crisis. Do you agree with that, Noga? Yeah, absolutely. Thank God. But really, things here are less, it's like the news isn't like pounding down it's different. And when you have that experience, you need a community. You need a community to keep sane. It also drives you crazy at times, like any good Jewish community would, right? But you need a community to sort of answer yourself day in, day out, subconsciously, why am I here? Not because you don't want to be there, it's because it's just difficult. Because there's so many conflicting narratives, there's so many issues, there's so many problems. You know, you're going to send your kid to the army. You know that you are in constant state of conflict. There's so many things going on. You need a community to be a soundboard about what matters. I think American Judaism needs a community as much for different reasons. Because I think if you don't have a community, you can stay completely alone and with your beautiful, large house and backyard, but like literally like away. But in Israel, it's the opposite, probably in the sense of like it's too intense, too close, no space. So at least you want the people with that tight net to be the kind of people that are asking similar questions, even if they have different answers. Listen, my community is extremely diverse politically, extremely. But the same questions of what kind of lives do we want to lead? How do we want to educate our children? What kind of country do we want to live in? What do we want this city and this society to encompass? Those are questions that we talk about a lot because we do them. We ask ourselves what can be done, not just what do we think about it, but can we change it? Can we affect it? Can we join it? So let's take a pause here, and I'd like you to ask. I'd like you to ask any question you'd like to ask about my congregation. No question is stupid, small, or redundant, okay? And I want to just add one more thing for you to imagine. Imagine a congregation of 150 families with a female rabbi in Israel, and the office is my kitchen table, and the sanctuary is the park. And the bat mitzvah or the bar mitzvah, we rent another Reform congregation in the city next to us. So imagine a congregation without a sanctuary. Imagine a congregation without a home. That's one thing that's difficult to imagine. And number two, imagine a congregation that, unlike the Orthodox congregation across the street, is not considered a religious entity by the state. Okay, so the chief rabbis of Cholon are Orthodox men. Okay? When they want to have a city event, they get money from the government to do that event. Okay? Their paychecks are from the government. The land that they built their synagogue on was given to them for free, and they're exempt from paying any kind of local taxes because it's a religious establishment. We're in the park. Can you imagine? It's so much fun, by the way. I don't know if I conveyed that, but it's so much fun. It is, isn't it? Okay, go ahead. Questions before I tell you about how we sued the city of Cholon and won. Go ahead.
Is this on? Oh.
Right.
Yes. So earlier, Adar spoke about the different branches of education and how there's the religious Jewish schools and the non-religious Jewish schools and the Arabic schools. You're talking about the fact that you started a school. What is your school?
That's a very good question. We entered the secular or the general, or what we call the mamlachti, which is the national regular school district or school denomination. But it's interesting because you can't win, right? Because if you go in as a rabbi, they say to you, well, it's not secular anymore if you're here, but you don't want it to be a religious school because you don't abide to halakha, to Orthodox religion, okay? Stream of thought. So yes, we are in the general non-religious stream. That's a very good question. No, we are guests within another school. So it's like a track. It's like a special, well, again, the whole system in Israel is different. Imagine you have one homeroom amongst all of them. That is a specific one. That is like a magnet school, but it's just one homeroom per grade. Does that make sense? Okay.
There is another line of education, which are the Tali schools.
There you go.
And would there have been a way?
We're Tali.
Okay.
Thank you. Not everyone knows Tali.
Well, I'm sorry.
Are you apologizing?
No,
You should be like, I know what Tali is. You don't. Tali, that's a very good example. Tali is the attempt, a very successful attempt, to say that there's a third way. It's not or Orthodox or none. It's traditional, it's community-based, it is liberal, or I would say pluralistic. I'm not sure what is the word pluralistic. We brought Tali to Cholon, yes. So we are a Tali school and we're Tali kindergartens, yes, and we're very proud of it. Thank you for that question. Please. I could tell by the way you read Torah so beautifully. Sure, still do. She said every school in Israel studied Tanakh, Bible. We still do. So what is your name? Nitza is asking me, what is my goal? Do I want separation between state and synagogue? Do we still study Tanakh and Talmud? Do I want all Israel to be reformed? Of course they do. Nitza, I don't know how to convince fellow Israelis to convince that I really don't want anything for anyone else. It's very difficult because in Israel, you're so used to someone telling me you're doing something wrong. You know what I want? I want options, Nitza. I want every family and every sub-community to have options to authentically express what they believe in. I have no problem with orthodoxy. I have no problem with ultra-orthodoxy. I definitely have no problem with people. In general, people are kind of great. Most of the time. But I'm troubled deeply, and I think you can agree with me, between this toxic combination between politics, money, and religion, and having that monopoly. And what happens really, okay, when I grew up, I'm 46. When I was in elementary school, and later in junior high and high school, we didn't study Talmud at all. And I had a very jaded, sarcastic Bible. She's like, so God, it says it in the Bible. Like I was like, are you even taking this seriously? She's like, it's a myth. So none of us took Bible seriously. I joked that was the only final exam I never studied for. Kind of ironic, right? But what I'm saying is, I went to a French school, to Alliance. And I could tell you when I graduated, I could tell you more about the French Revolution. That I really knew more about the French Revolution than I knew about anything that happened between the end of the Bible, between the Tanakh and the Palmach. I didn't know. I was completely ignorant. And the first time I started learning Jewish texts, I was in university, and I was sitting there in the Department of Hebrew Literature with my Orthodox female friends, and we had to take a Talmud class. You know, it was just something you had to do to graduate. And I was sitting in a Talmud class, and I couldn't, and I was a geek, I was a bookworm, and I couldn't find myself. I couldn't find my, as we say in Hebrew, my hands and my legs. I was trying to read through it. I was trying to figure it out. I could not understand I was totally illiterate. I was culturally illiterate. And many of my generation are. And we're the parents now. And our grandparents are no longer with us. So there comes the Passover Seder. And what do? It's a generational crisis in that sense, because the idea of knowing Talmud somehow is related to how you vote, or do you support the Orthodox rabbinate? It's like, what's the connection? There's a strong connection in Israeli society. It's as if Orthodoxy rabbinate owns Judaism. It's very difficult to sort of separate the religion from the religious establishment. Very difficult. Dat v'datiyim. It's almost like, it's like if you do this, you're part of a larger scheme of politics, and it's not spiritual, intellectual, cultural quest. It's very political in that sense.
We observe all the holidays to the T. Even though I know my brother wouldn't go to a synagogue because it's still Orthodox, and Noga probably knows, we all observe all the holidays, every holiday, the Jewish calendar. So there is so much culture and religion, and also it's a democracy. So you have a choice. You go and vote. You know, the Orthodox, also have a party, and you can vote.
Oh, I wish I would describe to how simple you're explaining this. Most of my votes, unfortunately, most of the people around me also don't vote on how they want their religion in Israel. They vote on security. That's number one. And number two, unfortunately, because of how the government is built in Israel, and then he's the political science knowledgeable person, right? I'm an amateur. But the way I understand the Israeli system, because it's a multi-party system and the coalition, many times, more times than not, the ultra-Orthodox are part of the coalition, and that means that so much funds and political pressure is put to maintain ultra-Orthodox rabbinate and power. It's a choice. I agree. Well, you know what? The question of choice is a philosophical question, because do we really choose who we vote for? Most research shows that we vote for the same party our parents voted for. So that's something interesting to think about choice. But even when you vote, voting is one way to affect your everyday life. But the truth of the matter is that if you want to get married in Israel, it doesn't matter how you voted. You still have to be Jewish and marry another halachically Jewish, right? Halachically from the mother. And only then you can marry. And if one of you are a questionable Jew, you cannot get married in Israel, which is a violation of basic civil rights. I agree. I'm going to vote and vote and vote and vote until it changes, Nitza. I need your help on that too. But basically what I'm saying is that it's the political and the personal are very, very intertwined. And is that a word? Or did I just make, okay. And it makes it difficult to change.
My name is Ronnie. I grew up
Shalom.
in Tel Aviv.
Shalom.
Shalom. And I don't agree with Nitza because I grew up in Tel Aviv. I went to high school in Tel Aviv. I went to university.
Which one?
תיכון עירוני א'.
לא רחוק, not so far away.
איפה את למדת?
אליאנס, ברמת
טוב,
אביב.
את
בוא נעבור
מדברת
לעברית.
צרפתית.
You can stay. אז מה קורה?
Anyway, what I say that I find missing in the education in the Chiloni is we never learned how to pray. See,
Imagine
you know,
the parents' reaction if I would say your kids are learning how to pray.
so the Tanakh and Talmud is nice, but
Right.
you know, to pray is also part that we should learn.
Oh, I'm not even going there. I do once a month a Rosh Chodesh party for the kids. We celebrate the new moon. And we sing. And they don't know they're singing prayers, because if I call it prayer, the PTSD is like, oh, she's making our kids religious. She's turning them into ultra-Orthodox. I'm like, I'm Reformed, remember? Female rabbi? Ain't going to happen? Doesn't matter. The post-traumatic stress of someone's trying to missionary, to turn our kids into something else. It's a cultural war, and we're in the midst of it. But I feel you. I think knowing the prayer book is a life skill as a Jew. Whatever you choose to do with it, it's a life skill, and I want to give that to whoever is interested in learning it. Please.
Okay, I have one experience. I have a daughter that lives, I have two daughters in Israel, but one daughter who lives on a mountaintop in the community of Har Halutz, which was established by the Reform movement.
Correct.
And now it attracts those that want to leave the big cities and want a quality of life. So there is sort of a mixture there. And at one point, after my husband had died, I decided I wanted to donate a Torah to their community. And my granddaughter was going to, actually it was my grandson that would be bar mitzvah. So they had a celebration of bringing the new Torah to be received by the bar mitzvah class, the
Beautiful.
incoming. It was beautiful. We walked from one area of Har Halutz to the entrance to the synagogue.
Was it the Reform Synagogue?
Well, it's
Pluralistic.
pluralistic.
I know.
They
I've
create
been
their
there.
own
Yeah.
experiences. And there was one father whose son was in the bar mitzvah class. And my daughter Leora, who had organized this experience, asked him if he would play the Halil, which is the recorder, because they were going to have singing and dancing as they brought the Torah to be received. And the father's response was, I'm not quite sure if I'm comfortable doing that. Now, his son is about to have a bar mitzvah. If I do that, then maybe my son will become
Orthodox.
It's not dati.
Yeah.
I don't like the word
Religious,
Orthodox.
yeah.
Religious. My daughter didn't know what to say.
You know, it's a bunch of people in Israel. It's a big part of, that's where I grew up, orthodoxly secular. You know what I'm saying? They're so orthodox about their secularism.
Well, he was.
What if I'll be exposed?
No, I think it was more that
Me.
his son would be pulled away from
Right.
their values.
Because we grew up on a black and white scale.
Right.
It's either or. It's them or us.
I just
It's a
wanna-
zero-sum game. It's not that way anyway.
Okay, I want to just finish the
Sure,
last
sure,
part
go
of the
ahead.
story. So my daughter said to him, look, do what you're comfortable doing. And in fact, he chose to participate. I don't know the end of the story because I don't
love
know.
that. Do you know why I love that? Because I think you said the most important word in all of this. Chose. And I think my job as a Reform rabbi in Israel, and really every rabbi, right? You would agree with me. It's to tell people you have a choice. We're not coercing you to do this. We're not telling you if you don't do. No, we're giving you, this choice is accessible to you. And it's a choice made out of joy and love. And it's not a choice made out of guilt or scaring anyone, right? And that's a big issue. We don't have a much more time, so we'll just one more quick comments, okay? We'll keep them quick. Go ahead.
Quick comment, and maybe to hear your thoughts. But in 1994, there were 3 families of this congregation who went to Israel for their daughters' bat mitzvahs. And we had the bas mitzvah on Masada, and it was Rabbi Maya Leibowitz, who was the first Israeli-born ordained female rabbi in Israel. And while we were in the middle of the ceremony, some Orthodox men came and demonstrated, and our guards had to confront them and take them away. And I'm just wondering how much that has changed since
What an
1994.
experience. And if it were a Reform male rabbi, do you think it would also happen?
Pardon?
If it were a Reform male rabbi leading the service?
I do
Probably
not think that would have
Right?
happened.
So what's the demonstration really about? Unfortunately, of course, you see extremists. I can tell you that I personally have never experienced any kind of some conflict, but nothing of that sort. But I definitely, unfortunately, expect that once we accomplish our next project that I'm about to tell you about in a minute, very shortly, I'm sure we're going to get some of that. And we're getting more reactions that are more vocal and sometimes even aggressive because we're doing really well in Israel. When we were a small, marginalized group, no one cared. No one demonstrated against you. And now, every day, every other day, there's something in the news against the Reform Jews in Israel. So you probably, if you're making so many people pissed off, you must be doing something right. Okay? That's like my theory. Go ahead.
Would you think that there is a reluctance to separate church and state for the preservation of a Jewish homeland?
For sure, 100%.
Because it seems, everybody has a homeland, and the only way we could possibly ensure that we have a homeland is if we make it a Jewish state.
What is your name?
Anthony, Tony.
Hi, Tony. I agree with you. I agree with that observation. And if I'll be really honest, I don't know what you think. I don't think we should separate between synagogue and state. Can I say that out loud? But, and this is a big but, an Ukrainian refugee comes to Israel, which is a Jewish state, they should not check if that person is Jewish by halakha to let them in, because we're a Jewish state. So my definition of a Jewish state is different. I want this to be a Jewish state, but I want this to be a Jewish state like the Declaration of Independence, according to the vision of the prophets, not according to the vision of 16th, 17th century halacha. Okay? So I'm fighting the fight of what kind of Jewish state? Some colleagues of mine are fighting the fight of separating. I respect that. I'm not sure that's the way to go. I want the word Jewish to be thicker, richer. That when we think Jewish, we see a rainbow. We don't see one specific stream. That's my goal. Sorry, Nita, we're running out of time. I'm really sorry, but I'll just say this. I don't know what you're going to take away from this talk. You can take away, wow, that Masada story, that's horrible. And Rabbi Galit said it's going to happen again. Wow, women of the wall, we're never going to be equal Jews in Israel. You can take that away. Actually, some of my colleagues do wonderful fundraising with that narrative. But what I want you to take away is that Cholon is a success story, not just because we were there to do it. Cholon is a success story because I think when you work with the tools of community organizing and you really ask people what they need, what they're passionate about, how can ancient Jewish tradition empower their lives and their goals as parents, as children, as human beings, it works. And the Reform movement has a lot to offer to Israeli society, and it is, as we speak, offering more and more. So I promised you the story of how we sued the municipality of Cholon and won. 7 years ago, the city manager said, you should also have a piece of land. Not just the Orthodox synagogue. You should apply. She was a friend. We applied. And we went through all the procedures and the red tape, and we were approved to go up to the next commissionary to discuss and approve the next step of allocating a piece of land, not very big, by the way, like 10,000 square foot. That's the whole thing for the entire campus. And they said, sure, you can apply. If you can prove that you're doing this for the betterment of the city, you can receive this piece of land for the government. But then they started dragging their feet, but in a really weird way. The commission wouldn't meet. It somehow didn't make it into the agenda. They had to cut the meeting short. They didn't make it to that piece of the agenda. They talked about it, but they didn't have the paperwork. And this was going on for 7 years. So finally, and I'm a little bit too nice sometimes. I'm like, they probably had to run and pick up their kids from the kindergarten and they couldn't talk about it. Next month they'll talk about it. Kind of naive. So finally, the Religious Action Center of Israel, which is part of the Reform movement, said, let's just sue him. I said, no, I have to work with these people. Let me talk. So we had a friend who was a friend of a friend who spoke to the mayor. And the mayor basically said, yes, I know what you're talking about. Sue me. I said, what? Sue me. Sorry, we didn't hear. Sue me. Because if you win, and you will, I can just tell my ultra-Orthodox coalition, sorry, the court is making me give them a piece of land. This is no longer a political issue, it's a legal issue. This is many times in Israel, that's how changes are made, through the courts. Big interesting story about that. I'm not an expert on it, but it's interesting reading about it. So we sued, and we won. And just before I left here in August to come for a 1-year interim job at Bnei Israel in Sacramento, we were told that that 10,000 square foot piece of land in the middle of Cholon is given to us. And now we just have to come up with the money to build. So with that, I will say next year in Cholon, my goal here is to put Cholon on the map of liberal Judaism. I invite you to come visit us. I invite you to spend some time with us. It's a very Hamish congregation. God willing, in a few years, you'll be able to come join us in our new home. If you have a need to contribute to this idea, if you want a naming opportunity, talk to Rabbi Nico. He'll make a decision if it should go to America or to Cholon. But we're very, very privileged to be here, and thank you for your partnership, and thank you for your support. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Galit and Adar and your family for joining us, being part of our congregation. And you are welcome at TBT anytime. I know a lot of people who would love to host you. Anybody have a bedroom? Got a few, I know. To spread the love of Judaism far and wide and create homes for Jews that represent our true ideals. And of course, making a congregation Jewish, meaning all the values that we represent through Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. So, and I am a female rabbi, and there you go. Lisa, I would like to, I know you have a program coming tomorrow. Lisa works with the Jewish Federation in Orange County, and there is a program happening tomorrow that really relates to this. Very quickly.
Oh, thank you so much. So I want to invite you all. Jewish Federation of Orange County is partnering with the interfaith community, including Orange County Interfaith Network and St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Very interesting and special organization here to share their work. It's an organization called Roots Shorashim Judur. It is a Palestinian and Israeli grassroots civil society organization based in Gush Etzion in the West Bank that brings Palestinians and Israelis together for transformational dialogue and work for the purpose of building a better future for all peoples in the region. It's not a political organization. They're not going to come and talk about solutions to the conflict. They're going to talk about what they're doing every day on the ground to build trust, to build relationships between communities that have very little interaction with each other and very little trust, and just, you know, how they approach very, very difficult dialogues in a way that uplifts both communities. So if you're interested, there's an online registration. I can give you the link. It's from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock tomorrow evening at St. Paul Episcopal Church in Tustin. And we'd love to see people come and learn more about this organization.
Thank you. Rabbi Galit, you'll be here for a few minutes. People can come and talk to you. Thank you all. Thank you to Tammy in our office for organizing our lunch in coordination with Rabbi Nico. Rabbi Nico, if you are there, Refuah Shlema. We look forward to seeing you back here in person in the week ahead. Noga, please give me. Oh, there you are. Rabbi Nico, would you like to have the last word? No. I can't believe it. Ah. Rabbi Nico can always unmute. He cannot unmute. All right. Oh, he's used to his wife having the last word. Okay. Well, technical difficulties. You can expect to hear from Rabbi Nico in the week ahead. We want to wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a Shavua Tov, and watch your TBT email for follow-up. Thank you for being here today.
So wouldn't that qualify as being a religious entity? So then you could possibly be
Recording stopped.